So here we have Jacqui Barcos, Cole Haddon, Chris Brancato, Peter Blake, and Chuck Rose. And I'm going to start by just going down the line and having each of you tell me, some of you have one, some of you have more than one, about like a series or two that you have been involved with, and tell us about the series and what made it international, what aspects of it made it international. So Jacqui, you want to start?
Sure. So I was a co-creator on a TV series called The Amazons, and it's sort of like a female Vikings meets Game of Thrones. And it's really the true life story of these real women warriors that the Greeks based their myths on. And so obviously this has an international component, and we were looking to set this up as an international co-pro. Most likely Canadian, France, Canadian, and we ended up selling it to Studio Canal, which was great.
I'm Cole Haddon. I created Dracula for NBC and Sky Living, which was sold initially as a domestic series. Then they went and found international co-financing through Sky Living, and it aired in over 40 countries as part of this deal, and was produced in Europe as a result. It made me fall in love with the international model, and now I'm developing a series called Suspiria de Profundis for an Italian company called Canal, which will be turned into an international co-production with France and England by the time it's done.
Can I also ask you guys just to let us know, like, for people who don't know, like, what country your company was with, like Studio Canal or Sky Living? So, Jacqui, would you?
Well, this was a little bit interesting because initially we were approached by Tandem, which is actually a German company, but it has subsidiaries other places. And mid-deal, they got acquired by Studio Canal Television. And so it ended up being a Studio Canal deal. And they're primarily based in France, but they've been buying up, so they also distribute in Germany and England.
Sky Living, the Dracula deal was with Sky Living in England, but Sky Living is sort of the HBO of the international world, so they distribute in just about every country that has cable.
Chris.
Hi, Chris Brancato. I'm the co-creator of Narcos. I made two series that I suppose could be termed international through Gaumont, which is a studio that's here in LA, but it's based in France, and it is a television adjunct to the old Gaumont feature film company that's been around for 60, 70, 80 years. Narcos was made for Netflix, specifically as part of Netflix's push to globalize their operations. Over the course of the first season of Narcos, Netflix, I think, finally achieved sort of 100% worldwide domination. But Narcos was specifically triggered because they were interested in ramping up their service in South America, particularly Brazil, which is one of the reasons why our lead actors are Brazilian rather than a Colombian. And this is what you see in the development of television series both here and abroad, which is a desire to extend past North American viewing audience and capture the world, especially for streaming services. So we were the beneficiaries of that.
Hi, my name is Peter Blake. Last year I worked on an in-development show called 000. It's sort of the follow-up to Gomorrah. If anyone's seen that show, it's the same producers and writers and director, and it's a international co-production. 000 is or will be between Canal, which is the company that Cole was talking about, an Italian production company, and Canal Plus, and it's about the international drug trade. So if it gets made, it'll be filmed in 4 different languages in 4 different countries. And I had the enormous good luck of going over to Rome for 2 weeks to work in the writer's room with the Italian writers. And then I consulted from here for a while. And then right now I am also, this is quasi-international, I'm writing a pilot. I was hired by a production company that Univision started called Univision Storyhouse. To write a pilot that was would be set and filmed in Mexico City. And then separate from all that, it's I've also run quasi-writers' rooms in other countries. The Swiss Broadcasting Company sent over some writers last year, and I did that. And then I also worked in a school in Haiti for a couple of weeks, sort of running a writer's room there.
I would imagine office space is cheaper. If Sony finds out, they'll probably move us there. But I'm Chuck Rose. I created a show called The Art of More that you saw the trailer for. It's on Crackle, which is Sony's streaming network. Unlike Hulu and Amazon and some of the others, it's ad-supported, which made some changes both creatively and also financially in terms of how the show was done. But when I wrote it, and I wrote the pilot on spec, I didn't think of it as an international show, but because of the Sony/Crackle model, Crackle is wholly owned by Sony, so we're Sony Pictures Television Production, but Crackle is only in the US. So in other parts of the world, the show is seen on either pay TV or free TV, so it was an important part of their business model that they'd be able to sell the show internationally. So Crackle had read the script, we went in, we met with them, but then we did have to go in and pitch it to Keith LeBoy and the Sony International Sales team to make sure this was a show that could be sold around the world, because the budget was much higher than anything Crackle had done before, and they were mostly known for the Seinfeld comedians in cars getting coffee. So this was their first big 1-hour scripted drama, and they could never, monetize it just from the advertising on Crackle alone. So they monetized it by selling it around the world, and because it was set in the world of big auction houses, and the guy had been a soldier in Iraq, and there would be flashbacks to Iraq, and the works of art would be from all over the world, they felt that the auction world had an international appeal, and I think that's what helped convince them that yes, this was a show with international appeal. And then we premiered at Cannes at MIPCOM, and I guess at that point then it became an international show because we premiered and we shoot it in Montreal, but that's purely a financial decision. That's not to make it more international, because we're pretending we're in New York. So that's it.
All right, and I just want to also reiterate, because Peter mentioned Canal Plus. Again, that's a French company also, for those of you who don't know. Jacqui, you have another project in development also that's international. Are you able to speak about that one as well, in case people have questions?
Well, I have two. I have an international, it's called The Activity, and it's basically a crime thriller. And I would probably set this up as a Canadian-France co-pro. And then it's not television, but I have an animated feature that is also a co-pro, and that's going to be set up in an animation facility in Montreal, and the tax credits are the best there, like 42%. And you can add on to that, and if you, my director's French, so we would then bring in the French component, and when you add it all up, it's like over 50% of tax credits back. I mean, it's so personally seductive.
Do you have a Canadian nationality, by the way?
Yeah, I do, but strangely enough, I only became Canadian a couple of years ago, and there are two ways to do that. You can marry a Canadian, which I did, but I actually found out you'd have to actually go and live there to qualify. But then there was this little known rule that if you have a parent who's Canadian, you can apply for citizenship through a parent, and then you don't have to live there.
Okay, so you might find that if you have any ancestors that are from other countries, you might want to start getting in touch with them.
Well, yeah, the other thing, and I didn't know this until I was really thinking about pursuing this, is that you have to look at the tax scenario, because once you become a resident, you're taxed at a much higher bracket, and it's your worldwide income. So even if it's not income made in Canada, that's still taxable. So that becomes a little bit of a issue.
Cool. Okay, so let's get back to another question for everyone, and this is back to what you were talking about, your shows. How did these deals come about for each of you?
In Dracula, I sold the series to NBC. We had a producer named Colin Callender. He had run HBO previously and had a relationship in England. So he went to Gareth Neame from Downton Abbey and brought him on board. And at that point, they went to Sky Living. They said, bring us some element, and they got Jonathan Rhys-Meyers to say yes to follow up from The Tudors, who is the favorite actor of Bob Greenblatt at NBC, so it made everyone happy. And they agreed to put in 65% of the funding, and so NBC only put in 35%. And so essentially it was nearly impossible for them to lose money. And the appeal to me in this scenario was, this was from the start because of the international contract, it wasn't so much a pilot. They were never allowed to shoot a pilot. They had to go straight to series. So the moment we got Jonathan Rhys-Meyers, they had to commit to all 10 episodes. If they ever tried to cancel it, they would get hit with a major penalty in the US for that.
And why did they have to go straight to series?
Because the international model, they don't cancel shows overseas. They air every episode. And so for that, the British to commit any money meant they had to have every episode shot and aired.
So that's just an interesting difference to note.
I love it.
Well, again, as I said, for Narcos was part of Netflix's plan of world domination, which is to say, I don't think they cared very much about how the United States audience was going to view the show, at least in its inception. They were interested in doing a show that they thought would increase their subscriber base in Latin America. And so somewhat simplistically, they assumed that a narcotics trafficking show would fit the bill. And to be quite honest, in Colombia, when we were making the show, when I would tell anybody we're doing the Pablo Escobar story, they would roll their eyes, all the Colombians, like they've seen a million telenovelas and documentaries about him. So the people least interested in a narcotics trafficking show are Latin Americans. But that said, when I went and sat with Cindy Holland, who's the creative head of Netflix, I had said to her, look, what I want to do is I hate it when we watch narcotics trafficking shows where the people who are obviously Hispanic are speaking in English. And unless you take care to explain why that's the case, I find it takes me out of the realism. So I want all of our narco characters to speak Spanish. And she said, great. And I said, well, that could be 30% of the show in Spanish. And she said, or 40 or 50. I realized that I wasn't in Kansas anymore because at a network, you would obviously get crucified for suggesting that half the show would be in Spanish. They were interested in that because I think they thought it would be, groundbreaking would be the wrong word. There are plenty of shows that use subtitles when they have limited dialogue in a foreign language. But I think they wanted that authenticity. They were cool with it, and they were also pretty cool with us making whatever show we saw fit to make. There was very, very little interference. The plan had always been to shoot in Colombia so as to continue this authenticity. Our director was Jose Padilla, a very successful Brazilian director, and he and I can't emphasize enough how important he was to the process because they were trying to open their service in Brazil. And he's a very successful Brazilian director. So, you look at decisions that get made for shows that end up coming out, and if you backtrack it, it was really a business decision they were making. They were trying to expand their subscription service. And when I came aboard as a North American viewer, as the self-professed gringo in the mix, I wanted a show that I'd be interested in watching. And I said to them, this show, if it's done properly, would be the first thing up on my Netflix queue to watch. I'm the viewer of the show. And so I felt, for better or worse, that we needed to have an American perspective without making the Americans necessarily white hat coming in to save the day heroes. And so that accounts for building out in the first season an American story with the life rights of 2 DEA agents we had. And I think what ended up happening is the show ended up working in places that they had no idea. So it was the #1 show in Germany and in weird Scandinavian countries. And so I suppose that the appetite for this kind of authenticity and international story just completely jumps over borders, and so there's a fascination with it, and I think that's good for all of us writers in here, which is to say that increasingly these companies, particularly the streaming service companies that want to be in different countries, are going to be open to ideas that you wouldn't be able to normally sell in American network television.
That's good news. I just want to interject before we go down the line, and I think this applies to you also, Chuck, is when you're writing for the Spanish-speaking parts, you're writing that in English?
Well, the Narcos process, what I was telling these guys is, I don't speak Spanish. I've been learning over the last few years, but I would write the scripts in English. They would be, the scenes that were supposed to be in Spanish, we would print in blue ink, and the scenes that would be in English would be in black ink. The scripts would then get sent to Colombia, where a translator would translate all the blue ink scenes into Spanish, and he would call me and say, and we would go over certain linguistic difficulties. Like, for example, pardon my French here, but just tell somebody to go F off. The Spanish translation is no mamando gallo, which is go suck a rooster. So he would obviously bring things like that to my attention, and we would massage the dialogue so that what was coming out of the characters' mouths would be realistic to what Hispanics would say. And then a script would be created. There'd be one script all in Spanish for our Colombian crew, most of whom only spoke Spanish. There'd be an English script for our department heads and the few people at top-level positions who didn't speak Spanish. And then, of course, there would be the amalgamated draft, which would be half in English and half in Spanish. Fun. Time-consuming, but fun.
And it does seem like sometimes the subtitles are still sticking with the original Americanized version. Like, they're not writing "Go Suck a Rooster" on our subtitles.
Right. Though we had a person in post-production who spoke Spanish who, I think his job was to translate the Spanish as accurately as possible, but also keeping an eye on the script, the English version of the script, so that what you read in the subtitles was an accurate reflection, but kept the intent of the scene.
Right. Thank you. Peter, do you want to tell us how you're dealing?
Yeah. So for 000, which is the French-Italian co-production I worked on, I mean, there were two things I did which made it possible to get that job. The first is I was in Rome on vacation, and I just called my agents and said, please set me up with meetings with any producers you can. So I met with this production company, Crackle, and the Italian TV industry is pretty small. I mean, there aren't, we should talk later, I don't want to go off on a total tangent, but about sort of like the environment of TV in Europe. I mean, basically the short version of it is England has great TV, but it's like 6-episode seasons all written by one person, and then usually produced by a second person, which, as far as I can tell, is just a means to keep the writer from having any power, basically, and leave it with the producers or the director. Scandinavia has great TV, and what they did is they sent people over to America, I think 20 years ago, and studied, the government sent people over, if I'm not wrong, and they sat in writers' rooms and studied what they did, so they actually have a more American model. And then you have the rest of continental Europe, which hasn't been as successful as at getting great shows. They're sort of working their way towards the American model in some ways. But in any case, Crackle had done what's considered the best Italian TV show ever, which is Gomorrah, which I think you should all check out. It's really great. It's airing right now on the Sundance Channel. So they set me up in a meeting with them, and the producers over there wanted an American to help the Italian writers come up with this new series, because the new series it was about the international drug trade, and would be in 4 different continents. I talked with them about that. The other thing that made it possible for me to even get that job is just that I speak Italian, and I don't speak it great, but I speak it well. If you want to work overseas, it helps to study different languages. I mean, in the future, I'm sure Mandarin will be really useful, but for now, the European languages are useful. Anyway, so they hired me, and I went over to Rome last spring and sat in the writer's room with the Italian writers and the Italian producers for a couple of weeks and just talked about the season. And it was fantastic. And we sort of communicated, we found that the easiest way to communicate was they would speak in Italian and I would speak in English, and it was just faster that way. And then finished that. I came back to the States. I continued consulting with them, like reading the outlines, but eventually they needed to hire an American writer to actually write the thing, and my Italian is nowhere good enough to work with these guys and actually write things, in Italian. So I spent like a few weeks trying to find an American writer for the writer's room over there, and obviously I was looking for someone who was fluent in, they wanted someone who was a working high-level American TV writer. He or she also needed to speak Italian. I could not find that. Luckily, the Italian writer on the show spoke fluent Spanish, so I ended up getting them to hire a friend of mine, this guy named Mauricio Katz, who is a Mexican writer. So right now they're writing the series and they're writing it together. I think they're working in it. They're working in Spanish, I think, and then I guess Mauricio translates it all into English, and Canal Plus reads it in English. And then when it goes to script, they will have it translated into the 4 different languages that it takes place in. So it's a kind of crazy process, but it was incredibly fun.
So there are good job opportunities for translators, is basically what you're saying, in this growing international market. Art of More came together. Again, I had written the pilot on spec, and I was working with a producer over at Sony named Larry Mark, who's a very big feature producer, Jerry Maguire and As Good as It Gets and all the Jim Brooks films. And he, like all feature producers, he's looking to get more into television. And Crackle, was also based at Sony, so he mentioned it to them, and they said, "Oh, this is great." The fact that there were a couple of things working in our favor. Again, you talked about it being a business decision. One was that it was already written, because Crackle was they were looking to do their House of Cards. They were looking to do their first big scripted 1-hour show to draw attention to a network that most people were not aware of. And so they didn't want a typical doctor, cop, lawyer show. So we had that going for it. It was set in the auction world, which is, I can tell you, because we took it all over town, it's very difficult to sell a show set in the auction world. Everybody's like, "Oh, that's a wonderful show. I would watch that. We're not going to buy it." So they were the most encouraging rejections I had ever gotten. And so they kept me plugging away. But then when Crackle read it, the fact that it was already written, so they didn't have to invest development money in it, they knew that what they were getting, and the fact that it was different, and the fact that it had an international appeal to it, these were all things that worked in our favor. And then we met with them, and again, they don't just do pilots. They knew whatever they were going to do, they were going to do 10 episodes or nothing. And they said, "Do you have a Bible? Do you have like a 5-season Bible?" And I said, "Yeah." Can you give me a couple days? I just want to clean it up a little bit. I went home that night and started writing the Bible, and turned it in the next week. And I thought, well, nobody's going to read a Bible. But the Bible
How
actually,
long was it, by the way?
It started off at like 8 or 9 pages, and when we finished, it was about 17 pages when we incorporated all of the notes and changes eventually. But initially, it was about an 8-page document, and because they, in any serialized show, it's not like Law and Order. They want to know where you're going with it, and especially if they're going to be committing 10 episodes for a new network. And then the other thing that was really important to them was that they have a big name cast. They wanted their Kevin Spacey. They wanted their big name cast to draw people to Crackle, and also so they could sell it internationally. And so the next thing we did was we went out to directors, and we got Gary Fleeter to come on board, who again, pretty big feature director, has also worked in television, great relationships with talent. And he was really the one who picked up the phone and said, called Dennis Quaid and said, Dennis, you've got to read this man. And Dennis was like, what's Crackle? But then in all the interviews, he's like, man, yeah, I love Crackle. I had been watching it. So, he knows how to talk to the press. So A, get someone who knows how to talk to the press, and B, don't believe anything you read in the press, though. But once Dennis and Kate came on board, then it was literally, we were already prepping, even though we didn't have our cast, and then they came on board 3 weeks before we were going to start shooting. I mean, we'd already hired Muse, which was our company up in Montreal, to do it up there, again, simply because it was cheaper, and Sony had done a couple of shows up in Montreal with Muse that, so they had the infrastructure, and literally 3 days later, we were on a plane flying to New York for upfronts, and Dennis and Kate were promoting the show, and 2 weeks after that we started shooting. Your other question was about the international scene. We do have a number of scenes that are in Arabic, and all the other actors other than our 4 stars had to be Canadian. So we had to find good, Arabic actors in Canada. And actually there's a fairly surprisingly large pool of Arabic talent up there, because surprise, surprise, they get treated better in Canada than they do in the States. Imagine that. But, again, being the gringo, not all Arabic actors are the same, and they're not all from the same country, and they don't all speak the same language. So our 3 lead Arabic actors, one was from Egypt, one was from Pakistan, and one spoke Farsi. So they all spoke different languages, and we had to have the scenes ahead of time so they could be translated. We would get a translator to work with all of them so they could say it in Arabic with a close enough dialect. Again, I wouldn't know the difference, but we have not gotten any hate mail that I know of from our Arabic viewers, so I guess we pulled it off. But it definitely adds an extra layer when you have to have scenes that are translated and then subtitled, and we had a kid who didn't speak any English and had to learn his lines phonetically. So it does, and the crews they all speak French up there. They speak English too, which is fine, you can talk to them, but the danger is that they can talk to each other in French. You don't know what they're saying, but they're wonderful, and the show got done. So again, it was a matter of timing and business model coming together in a way that benefited everybody, and that's how the show happened.
And why did all the actors have to be Canadian besides the 4 leads?
Tax credits, budget, the deal that they have up there. All our directors, other than Gary Fleeter, our DGC, our editors, our composer, everything, both tax credit and the deal that they have, that Muse has with Canada. So even the guest stars we brought in this season, like Sandrine Holt from Walking Dead, and a couple other people are Canadian. They work here, but they're Canadian citizens. They have to pay taxes in Canada. I know there are some people who try and get around it and do the residency thing, but that's not that easy to do.
Yeah, and I imagine a few of you have dealt with different countries' tax credits, and that has affected you. Has anyone else?
Well, it seems like every show that I've ever been involved with, and usually through Hollywood studios, they're automatically looking to shoot in a state in this country or in another country. Like the show I just finished was a couple months ago, was in South Africa, where I think a good 20% of the budget, 15-20% of the budget gets picked up by their government. So everybody in the business is looking for the best tax situation they can for the show. Since I presume everybody here is interested in exploring the possibility of employment or creation in the international television business, the thing I would say just as a blanket statement is you have to try to know the landscape. And I'm someone who doesn't, quite honestly. Having done some panels in Europe recently, and I was amazed at how each territory of the world has different broadcasters and different sources of financing and different methods by which they finance shows, and their system over there is very different than ours. Here, the model has been built on trying to make 22 episodes of a CSI every year, and we get paid on that basis, and only recently in this country have short orders of 10 episodes or 6 episodes or 13 become a little bit more the norm. In Europe, and these countries, a series is generally 6 episodes, And if you're
A season or a series?
well, they call it a season is called a series. So yeah, so a season is 6 episodes or 8 episodes perhaps, and the writers are true, almost as viewed as playwrights. You write it at home, you write all the scripts, and you eventually deliver them to a producer. In our country, writers have amassed a certain amount of power that makes them producers as well. So you have much more say over the way your material is made in this country. And there are reasons for that I won't get into, but part of it is when you have 22 scripts a year to deliver, as this system always has, the person who has to be in charge of production is the writer, because they know what's coming next. But my point is that if you're interested in taking an idea, particularly one that is globe-trotting, like for instance Vikings, which is a History Channel, is everybody's interested in Vikings. You know, in other words, everybody can relate to the idea that there were Vikings. And so if you have ideas like that, I think what you have to try to do is subscribe to publications. I think one's called C21 that deals with the international market. Start to research online how shows are put together, French-Canadian co-productions, South African tax credits. There are, in Colombia, for Narcos, there's no television tax credit there because the Carol Code, which is the enormous TV telenovela company there, has convinced the government not to give TV tax credits. So the first 2 hours of Narcos, we were somehow able to bill it as a movie. We're making a 2-hour movie, and there is a movie tax credit in Colombia. So we took advantage, and they covered 40% of the budget of the first 2 episodes of Narcos. And then
You said there were 4 sequels to that movie?
All released the same year.
But my point is, if you want to find the opportunities, I also find the Europeans to be very interested in the American perspective and in the American system. They're all kind of giddy right now with the word showrunner, which is a word that like 15 years ago none of us knew unless you were doing it. And now that name, that job designation has been sort of popularized both here and in Europe. So my point is, I think they're interested in our show ideas collectively, but it's up to you to study the landscape and see where the opportunities lay. And the fact that you're sitting here in Los Angeles, even just that, even if you've had nothing produced, there's something to them that's as magical about you're a Los Angeles writer as there is about the fact that anytime a Brit speaks to me, I go, oh my God, you're smarter than us. They are.
Yeah, and Jacqui, I don't want to forget you, about how your deal came to be.
Well, I have a partner, Jennifer Warren, who actually brought me the concept, and we researched at length. I mean, it's such a big subject matter, so we spent about a year researching, and then we decided to write a Bible. And Jennifer had found this incredible female archaeologist who turns out she's the foremost expert and authority on the subject of Amazon. She dedicated her life to it, chased down and sneak into countries, and was a tomb raider herself. And she has a pretty incredible story. And she had written a book called Warrior Women. And while it was a nonfiction book that really detailed her exploits, and it didn't necessarily reflect the narrative that we were telling, we found it deeply informative and thought that having an authority on the subject would be helpful. So we included her, we optioned her book, and it was part of our package. So, I had this Bible, we had Janine, and I decided to take it to a producer that I knew was actually one of the first producers I ever worked with, Fred Fuchs. My first job was working for Francis Coppola's company, and at the time Fred ran his company, and then he met and fell in love with a Canadian, moved to Canada, worked at the CBC, left, became an independent producer, and he was really one of the first to develop TV series with foreign partners and use the international CoPro model for television. So back when miniseries finally started coming back with Pillars of the Earth, he was really at the forefront, pioneering this use of going to foreign partners. And the beauty of that is, if you go to foreign partners first, they will help underwrite the development. So they'll help, they'll put money towards a pitch or a treatment. They'll pay for a showrunner to come on board. Sometimes they'll finance a pilot or co-finance a pilot. Anyway, I met with Fred at the Toronto Festival, and he immediately responded to the material, and he came on board, which was fantastic. And just as an aside, in terms of looking for opportunities, if you're sort of just studying the international market and world, a really good place is these film festivals now, particularly places like Toronto, AFM, Cannes. It used to be that was really only the place that feature people went to, but increasingly more and more feature people, I mean the bottom's really, it's cratering now, the bottom's falling out, and more feature people are turning and looking at and defecting to the TV world. And so you have sales agents, financiers are all looking to package, and so that's also a really great place to meet possible partners.
Well, because when you bring them a feature, the first thing they say is, could it be a TV series?
Exactly.
I would never have heard that, 15 years ago.
Right. So so anyway, Fred loved the material, came on board. We were thrilled, and he asked us to redevelop the material a little bit. So we repurposed the Bible. He took it out to market, and in the best of possible worlds, we actually got a few offers. We got an offer from a top American company and one from a French company. And
Did
drilling
you
down.
adjust a Bible, or was it a script, a pilot as well?
We decided not to. I was prepared to write the pilot, but I was advised by Fred not to. And part of the reason was I didn't have a huge track record in television. I'm really more from the feature world. And because this budget level is so huge, it's like they're thinking like Game of Thrones. The idea was to bring on a fancy A-list showrunner and have them write it. And it's like, why would I write a pilot if I know a showrunner's going to come on and completely rewrite it? And the point of going to an international partner was to have them underwrite that pilot.
I've got a comment about that because the joke in the business right now is that at a certain point people were told, no, don't write a soprano spec to show that you can write. We want to hear your original voice. And so if I had a nickel for every speculative pilot script that I get offered to be sent every week, I could retire today. So because everybody has their own original pilot script, and some of the scripts are very good, most are just mediocre. But the fact is, when I hear you talking about the way you set it up, there's a bunch of things that spring out at me that might be useful for you guys. The first thing is you came up with an idea that can jump borders. In other words, who isn't interested in the Amazon race of warrior women? I know I am. But then what you also did was optioned intellectual property, a book that maybe has nothing to do with the narrative you're going to tell, but for whatever reason, in the climate we're in now, having some kind of brand attached to your project, being able to say to an executive, you know what, we optioned this material. It suggests that somebody was willing to publish a book on this material, so somebody might be willing to make a television series about it. And so I sometimes advise people who are showing me show ideas or pilots that they've written. I say, go out and, you want to do a show about New York City in Chinatown in 1900. Yes, I do. My grandfather owned a bordello in Chinatown. Well, great. Your grandfather did that. Can you find a book that's about that time period? If you can, option it. It'll probably cost you a nickel because nobody's dying to buy rights to books about Chinatown in 1900. But then you can go into your buyer and say, well, I have the definitive book about this time period. And then you can say whatever you want about what your TV series is. I've also found that the speculative, it's fun to sit down and write a pilot because you feel like you're getting something done. But in general, that can actually be the bridge you burn never to be able to cross. Because networks buy shows on the basis of what they want. They want to be involved in the development of the show. They want, in other words, to write a pilot, like you threaded the needle from 100 yards. You wrote what I imagine would be an excellent spec pilot. You're a professional writer already, and so you have a track record. And you happen to get that script into the hands of a company that was just thinking about getting into scripted and didn't want to do cop, doctor, and lawyer. And so you sort of threaded the needle from 100 yards. And there were all sorts of steps along that way, as I hear you talk, that could have gone wrong. If you don't get Dennis Quaid, maybe they decide against it. If you can't deliver a series Bible that's interesting, maybe they realize the show doesn't have any legs. So
I was not trying to thread the needle, and I think that's why I did, because I was writing a script that I wanted to, a show that I would want to watch about something that I cared about, and so I just created the thread, and we happened to find the right needle.
Right.
But we had gone through several needles before that.
Well, I think no, of course, yes. You also said when you sent it out to the normal buyers in town, they were like, auction show, not going to work for us.
Well, we took it out as a pitch.
Uh-huh.
We pitched it, and the people loved the pitch, but the problem is you're rarely pitching to the head of the network.
Right.
So they in turn had to take it to their boss, and even though I pitched it as a thriller in the art world, then they would pitch it to their boss who heard, art world.
Exactly.
Once I wrote it, actually Crackle was the first place we took it as a script, because my agents felt like, well, we don't really want to send the script back to places that have already
Passed,
pitch,
yeah.
which may or may not have been right. We don't know, because Crackle was really the first place we took the script. But I said, look, if they can't get that it's a thriller from the script, then I haven't done my job.
Right. Well, I guess the point for me is you may want to write that pilot just as an exercise, but it's not always the pilot that's the smartest way to come forward when you're trying to sell the show.
Right, and I also, a lot of the comments that I received from like Fred, who's done this for years, is that when you are talking to possible partners, you want to get them pregnant with your idea. So if you get them engaged and then you co-develop the pilot or the treatment together, they become much more invested. And to that end, one of the issues we had with Studio Canal is they really wanted to get a top A-list showrunner, but they only wanted the showrunner to do a treatment. They did not want to write a pilot in advance for this very same reason. They wanted to go to a US network and hear their take and let them inform what the pilot would be. So any idea, there's like a million iterations, so why spend months writing a pilot when another partner comes in and is going to have a different version? And interestingly, just to finish this version of like having an IP, we got two offers, one from a U.S. company and one from the French company. And the true difference between the two offers was the French company was willing to acquire the option of this book. The American company did not want to, didn't find value. And you often find, especially in places like France, there's that droit de morale. They really have a strong tradition of respect of the right of the author. And we really felt that Janine had incredible value, not only from her knowledge of the subject matter, but just if you think about the DVD extras and her being on the set and really grounding this in authenticity, we thought she was incredibly valuable. So we ended up going with the French company.
I can't believe why the American company wouldn't just option it. It wouldn't be that expensive.
It wasn't. It's very strange.
I think that's really interesting. I mean, it's amazing that you got that done that way. Because in general, I don't think the best takeaway that you guys should get is that you guys should write Bibles instead of pilots. I think in general, it'll be easier to sell a pilot than it will be to sell a Bible. I mean, by the way, there's a whole...
disagree.
Really?
I do too. Internationally, I don't know anyone who sold a pilot internationally, just a spec. I don't know of anyone.
I mean, I think
I've
you
never
can bring
found-
up, I can give you 5 examples off the top of my head of quote-unquote speculative pilots that ended up being very successful TV series. Desperate Housewives, The Shield. You wrote it. You wrote it as a spec, but with an aim towards Crackle, right?
I'd never heard of Crackle when I wrote it, actually. That's where it wound up. But I wrote it as a spec.
I just think, Peter, that this town is so flooded with pilots that I know that executive friends of mine like groan at the idea of having to go home and read some pilot that an agent said, I'm serious, this is the next great hit show. And they go home and they read it. It's not right for their network. It's not dialed in. They're not invested in it because they had nothing to do with its discussion or creation. And so their de facto response is, nah. And so I think that it's not to say that writing the pilot, if you guys are invested in the idea, is a bad move at all. I'm just not always so sure coming forward with the pilot is going to create the kind of excitement you want to sell your project. In general, I found that it's more desirable to have a pitch that's backed with something that feels like you have it and nobody else can get it.
I think there's benefits and risks both ways. I mean, I've sold a couple of pilots since The Art of More, and they have all been pitches. I have not spec'd anything since The Art of More, but it's because I have a show on the air now. Before that, I sold a couple of pitches before that too, because networks still buy pitches mostly, because broadcast network wants to develop it. But I think if it is something that's really out of the box or unusual, I think it can't hurt to spec it. If nothing else, if you haven't worked a lot in television, I think you almost have to spec it. And obviously, if you are established in television, then it's probably better if you can sell it as a pitch, because then, as you say, then they can be invested in the shaping and the writing of it. And to have the Bible ready if you need it, but not to lead with the Bible.
I want to clarify my disagreement, which is simply in the context of the international market. I don't know people who sell specs. If you're dealing with selling something in Los Angeles, I know people who have sold specs, but if we're trying to sell things overseas, I would never think about selling a spec, writing a spec for that, because those ideas are so crazy they don't belong in the US market anyway. In general, somebody overseas wants to buy the Amazons. They want to buy any of these.
Right.
You need that European appetite for interesting, unconventional stories, and they want to buy a pitch.
So I think we need to move on to the question and answers, right? But let me just say one thing on this topic, because I've had to deal with this with other pilots I've written. There is a difference between a format and a Bible, and it's totally unclear what the difference is, but in general, formats are shorter, Bibles are longer. And I think people want to read the shorter version of it, like 10 to 15 pages. I think I checked in with some executive friends of mine recently and said, do you want to read a 50-page Bible? And they all said, absolutely not, that's the worst thing. But yeah, sure, 10 pages, yeah, I can see why executives like that more than a script. But I would be worried about like spending months writing an incredibly detailed 30-page thing.
Yeah, I only presented the Bible after I was asked for it, and where the Bible really helped, aside from the network, is that the Bible really helped with the actors. Dennis Quaid, Kate Bosworth, they all said, we didn't just read the pilot script, we read the Bible because we wanted to know where our characters were going, and I didn't think that the actors would ever read the Bible, but they did. So, I mean, look, every situation is different, but in our case, that was where, but again, I didn't do it until I was asked for it. I didn't lead with it.
By the way, on Chris's on your last show, your Bible was the Bible.
That's right. I did a show about the Old Testament, so I called myself God's showrunner.
You didn't even have to write it. And that's more than 50 pages, isn't it?
So I think one takeaway so far is that it's sort of the Wild West, and there's a lot of ways to go about doing things, especially in the international market, where really you're dealing with different countries that each sort of have their own approach. For example, in France, which I'm dealing with right now, you kind of have to turn in a Bible before you write anything for the broadcasters to decide whether or not they want to move forward with it. So again, like, it's going to be different in every country. But I do want to move on to the Q&A. First, I want to thank you guys for answering so many of my questions without me having to ask. Okay, if you guys don't mind, Cole has something.
I just think it's important that all of us come to the international market for different reasons. Some of us stumbled into it. For me, I want to only work in the international market. The upsides are you get to live overseas. If you want to pursue these things, these are some of the risks that come with it. I would prefer to live in Europe. And so if somebody wants to pay me to live in Europe, I think this is a great thing. I get to have a show that goes straight to series. I think this is a great thing. I get treated like a king when I go to Europe. They fly me over in first class, even though I'm just developing stuff. And they spend a fortune on you. And I've enjoyed this. I enjoy the creative freedom that comes with this, and the fact that the ideas that I have, I think that they would play in the US, but they play better overseas as something that should be licensed here after they produce the shows overseas. So there are different reasons to go into it, and so I pitch most of my stuff now overseas first. I'm not pitching to a US producer whom I want to come on and then take me to Europe. I go to Europe first.
And just sort of following up on that, I had also a very wonderful experience working with Studio Canal, and despite the fact that I have limited experience as a TV writer, once we sold this, I was treated as a co-creator. And I clearly felt like I had a seat at the table, and my opinions were respected, and I was a valued partner. And I've had I've had experiences in the in the U.S. market. And it's been a very different experience where it's very hierarchical, and sometimes you get marginalized if you're more of an emerging.
Great, so we're going to go to questions. There are people with microphones, so what you want to do is get their attention.
Microphones equal power.
And the person who has the microphone will ask the question. Please try to be concise and limit yourself to one question. Thank you. So who has a microphone?
Being flown in. Here we go.
It's good to be in the front. Well, my question, you guys are all in the drama world. I'm more comedy world. I'm just curious. I really want to know if you guys have international status. That was really great to know about your Canadian status. But my real question is just any insight into the comedy world in terms of is it the same sort of ability to kind of jump into this market or not? Is it just completely different? Or do you not know?
I think comedy does it. It's complicated. I think in general, American comedies don't travel as well as American dramas. There seems
It was
to be
more about just the idea of like a format, like a comedic comedy format that is an international format to bring it over there versus not an American show to bring over.
Right. I mean, I guess one thing is that comedy, I don't know, I feel like comedy is so sort of language-based and specific as opposed to like a show about like the drug trade or something where everyone can deal with it. But the answer is I don't fully know. One thing I would say though is that there is a history of American comedies being remade in Europe, and they'll often take an American, sometimes the American retired showrunner over to do it for them. So I know people who've done that. It's I don't know anything.
That's different than selling an original.
Oh
Because
yeah.
Sony, they have
totally.
There's a whole wall at Sony with the cast of Married with Children in 8 different countries.
That's great.
It's got the blonde with the short skirt and the guy and the wife, and they're all from different countries. But
Absolutely, I'm just saying that is a whole other way of
Yeah.
working internationally that we haven't touched on and that I know very little about, but it exists.
I don't think it's a coincidence that all the people up here are drama writers.
Okay, I can speak to this a little bit. The show I'm developing in France is a half hour. It is a comedy. And I spoke to a lot of people from a lot of countries in trying to get it off the ground. And one thing that I think is important is it's a comedy in the vein of a Louis or a Transparent. It's a single camera, and I think they're starting to be a little bit more open to that as opposed to 4-camera shows, which I really don't think you can sell because there's too much of a cultural difference. But so if you have something that's like can be taken seriously and has the same type of serious overarching themes that we're hearing on the panel today, there is a chance to do a serious comedy, but it's very much more difficult to find the right partners for. Much more difficult.
Yeah, and also just think about it. I mean, you all know the names of foreign series, but all the ones I know of are dramas. I mean, just the quality of the Bridge or whatever is just going to be higher than the comedies in general. I guess they still travel as well, but I'm not really sure why.
Do we have anyone in the other room?
Yeah, we have a question.
Visible.
Greetings, you can't see me, but I can see you.
That's Derek, right?
Yeah, it is, thank you. So, several of you mentioned co-production. I'm hoping you could explain exactly what that is and how a typical co-production deal is structured.
We're just the writers, man. We don't know. That's the next panel.
It's amazing how much of it is Wild West. Everything seems to work differently on every show that I approach. I know with Dracula, they went and they got Sky Living to just partner with NBC, which in movie terms, it's when you have multiple production companies on the same film. And so they brought 65% of the financing. And the second project I'm working on, the producers finance the development. Once they get a broadcaster, they'll then probably go get Sky Living again and a couple other companies who pitch in money and then produce it.
And I just want to mention that in the back of your programs, there is a glossary that includes the term co-production among many other of the terms you might have heard today.
And just quickly to clarify, there's a difference between soft money or tax credits. So you can go to Canada and just qualify for tax credits if you partner, you do a co-venture, you partner with a Canadian producer, and then as you're just getting the incentives. A co-production is specifically a co-production treaty between two countries that have an existing treaty. The U.S. doesn't have any with anybody.
Yes, in the case of what I try to sell now, like this Italian show, they would license it to the United States, which Chris worked on one of these shows, Hannibal, which had no U.S. money up front. It was just licensed entirely. Yeah.
And again, if you have a dual nationality of any kind, this is an opportunity for you to get involved in co-productions if your other country has co-production opportunities.
Speaking of which, many of these producers who were able to really help their career by getting Italian nationality, Italy made it easy to get Italian nationality if your grandparents or great-grandparents or something. It's a very complicated thing. And at one point, I'm going to look into it myself because I don't think I'm Italian enough, but that is one way to do it, and then you're a member of the European Union, if it still exists at that point.
All right, who has the microphone in this room?
Oh, come on, let me ask two related questions. Please, please.
No. See how it goes.
Okay.
Start with one.
Your name is?
Jacqui.
Yes, Jacqui, yes. Okay, I'm an animation writer, so I'm interested in your animated feature. Did you bring an original property to the studio? Did they call you in? How did that happen? The Canadian thing.
We've decided specifically to do this independently, and so we're still raising money. But what I did was I wrote the script, and then we brought on a top director. So Daniel Jeanette was the animation director of Happy Feet, and then I wanted this to be a co-production. So it's a Canadian-French co-production. I looked at all the facilities out there, and we went to Micros Images, which is one of the top French companies that they just did the Little Prince. And we kind of caught them at the right time, as just as they were going into the animation market. So they were willing to, we got extraordinarily lucky, they were willing to do a sizzle reel for us. So they did a teaser for us, investing their own money in basically services. So now we have the sizzle reel, and we just partnered with John Legend's company, Get Lifted, so they're going to be bringing on the music. And so what I'm doing is I'm packaging it. So now I have a script, I have great directors, I have Jamal Sims, I have a facility, and we're now packaging it with talent. And once all that's in place, I have some financiers that are circling, and we've decided that it makes sense for us to do this independently. One, because we keep the artistic integrity in place, and it's a little bit edgy, so we didn't want it whitewashed. And also, I'm also a producer on it, the incentives, I mean, we stand to make a lot more money because we can take a piece of the back end, and we actually will see a back end.
Well, do you think that a feature like this can go into the marketplace against the big American behemoths, with all their merchandise and all that?
Yes.
Yes.
There's increasingly more and more appetite and interest, and another buyer that's voraciously buying up, snapping up properties is Netflix. So I don't know how important that theatrical is, but they're really aggressively going after animation.
Yeah, I've got a big Netflix billboard in my new neighborhood. It's like, what? Animation? Yeah.
All right, is there someone in the lounge that has a question?
Yeah. Go ahead. Hi, I have a question about budgets. There's a budget in the United States for a show. There's maybe a European or Asian or whatever budget. How do they relate, or how do you go into a show or as an idea, and how do the budgets work overseas?
It's a good question.
Well, is that my good friend Clay asking that question?
It is. I agree.
I think that not having made a show specifically in Europe, I would imagine that the budget totals are quite a bit lower than typical Hollywood fare. And I think that you know, my philosophy has always been to try to work with the man who's paying, or the man or woman who's paying for the show, so that I think, you know, it's obvious that some ideas that we come create, the Amazons is not going to be a low budget show, and Narcos was never going to be a low budget show. So Clay, I think you have to first try to let the marketplace decide if they're going to like your idea. I don't think you try to purposely think about budget when you're coming up with the show. But I would imagine that in moving a show to production in Europe, you're going to have to find ways to make it more cost efficient, because simply there are fewer eyeballs on it, so the budget of the show is going to be less. And I found that the budgets to shows are exactly correlative with how many viewers they expect to watch it. More viewers they expect to watch it, the more money you're going to get to make it.
Or if you're on a newer platform, I know for Crackle, you know, our show was a huge investment for them, but it was still not the level of investment that Netflix was making on their scripted shows. So, you know, if you're on a newer platform, you have to expect that you're going to have to do things more economically.
Right. And I mean, this is good news for writers. You've got Apple TV coming up. You're going to have a bunch of other channels coming, all of whom have to distinguish themselves by coming up with shows that we're all talking about. And Netflix makes its money, as does Amazon, by a subscription base. In other words, they don't care about ratings. But the great thing about Netflix is they release tons of shows that are terrible, that you've never even heard of. Why? Because they stop marketing the minute they get critically drubbed. All they do is focus their marketing on things that people are talking about and things that have been critically well reviewed. Well, Netflix has realized now that the studios aren't going to sell them Scandal and all their shows in perpetuity, because Netflix is killing those studios. So that's why Netflix has made this $6 billion per year jump into creating original content, which then creates an enormous amount of appetite for stuff that's different. And Netflix doesn't care if it's a 4-quadrant show that everybody's going to watch. They care about a show that a certain segment is going to watch and that critics are going to love and people are going to talk about and say to their friends, you better get Netflix to watch this show, in order to watch this show. So they're willing to spend a lot of money.
They would probably turn down the 4-quadrant show because they would say, take that to broadcast, we're different.
Do you want to go?
Yeah, just one other interesting thing about Netflix is that they've discovered that people will watch things that have a beginning and an end. So if you sell a show to Netflix, they will almost always give you 3 seasons so you can wrap it up, because they figure that the library will continue in the future. And if they just cancel it after 1 season, like American networks do, no one's going to watch it next year.
First, Chris more or less said it. Don't create a show based on what you think, what budget will appeal to buyers. And second, just a strange little quirk of my show, Dracula, we shot in Budapest so that the budget would be more reasonable. This is kind of comical in hindsight, one, because of just poor producers, and two, the fact that the show that was shot in Budapest cost more than twice what Peaky Blinders does, which has significant actors and I think looks better.
Where's Peaky Blinders shot?
Peaky Blinders is shot in the UK.
But not in London, right?
No, but just outside London. It's but we could have done that too. We could have shot in any town, but they deemed the budget of shooting in the UK so ridiculous that we had to go to Budapest, where we had to recreate London in stages, and they didn't have anything that could double. We could never leave stages because they had been told Budapest would double, and nothing about Budapest doubled at all.
Did they do a location scout?
I have no idea what they did. This was there were some of the EPs, they sent us these books, and I kept saying, like, this doesn't look appropriate, and I don't know, we'll stylize it. It still doesn't going to work. We'll just keep redressing the same street. And then if you watch my show, every street looks astoundingly the same. It's a little dirtier, and there's the wagons and everything passing along are of different quality. So it somehow indicates you're in a better part of town. And so the show's beautiful, but still do not understand how we spent so much more than Peaky Blinders and couldn't be in England. It's bizarre to me. Because I created the show, then they said we're going to make it, and I said, great, I'm moving to the UK. And then I didn't.
All right, who has the mic?
For Cole, I was wondering if you could follow up on, you say now you pitch your shows internationally first. If you were to give advice to someone who has yet to make those connections, how would you start? What would you do if it was taking an original idea of one of these international places?
Peter and I have talked a bit about this. The first step, which is unfortunate for many who don't have an agent yet, you really need an agent. So the agent will sometimes tell you that there is no money overseas. They'll say, they come up with an astounding list of stories, like, oh, well, they need WGA signatory, and it's impossible to do until there's a US producer. I've heard so many stories about what agents tell their clients so that they can't go pitch this stuff. It's all BS. They all have access, they just don't know what they're doing. In some cases they do, and the clients of those agents get to go pitch stuff overseas. I travel to Europe a couple times a year, and every time I go, like Peter, I ask for as many meetings as I can get, and sometimes I'll go to my foreign packaging agent is on the next panel. I'll run ideas by him. He tells me what he thinks might work internationally. But most of my ideas, I've sold 18 things now in features and television, and only 3 of them have had any scenes in the United States. But I write about the US just in other people's backyards. I just would prefer someone to pay me to go live overseas. I'm half Australian, so half of me is always a little uncomfortable here. I don't like guns.
I have a thought about your question, which is that I think the elephant in the room, as you pointed out, what companies want is a showrunner who is going to be the guarantor that the episodes are going to get made. And so the problem is this: an original idea. To be quite honest, every single person in this room has an original idea. Every single showrunner you will ever meet has his or her own original ideas. And so the rub, the difficulty is how to wedge yourself into the marketplace in a way that that your idea is, I call them tsunamis, fog cutters. There's no chance that anybody can hear it and say, you know what, I gotta pass on this. And the problem is, many people have good sounding television ideas, and most people have okay sounding television ideas. Not so hard to say no to the script I read a few weeks ago about cops in Boston in the 50s chasing a killer. I've seen iterations of that, hundreds of them.
I thought I did a good job.
So the point being, I'm always thinking about how when I was starting out, and it was a different system then, how are you getting the things you're going to actually need to go make the show? Not just make a script sale. You're going to end up needing to have a showrunner that somebody cares about. But showrunners are predisposed not to partner with people who don't have credits, because why do you want to have to listen to somebody who's not had experience in the game? It's why this notion of like IP and making your idea stand out, not just on the basis of I thought of a good idea, but hey, I have something that you can't get unless you deal with me. And I think there's a lot of smoke and mirrors behind it. In other words, you're not going to transcribe her book into your script on any level, but it automatically becomes more interesting because her idea has been branded and published by someone somewhere. And I can't discount what an emotional effect that has on people you're trying to sell to.
And from my experience, if you're going directly to the buyers in Europe, to the producers, you're selling them ideas that are appropriate for their countries. If you do not care about their country, if you don't want to become a master of their culture, if you're not interested, you have no business going over there and pitching this stuff. It's not a place for an American just to go get a job. It's a place for an American who's passionate about learning something else and telling someone else's stories. I think you have to dive in
Right.
and become masters of these worlds.
And like, I have representation, but I can't say that it's with the top 3. And what I've found, and I've been doing this for years, is I'm really an entrepreneurial writer. I'm a writer-producer, and I've always been that way. And just because you don't have an agent doesn't mean you can't go out there and uncover opportunities, but you have to be aggressively pursuing them. And there are many pathways to that. As I said, going to like markets and festivals, Toronto, AFM, there are plenty of opportunities there to meet producers, financiers, packagers, but you have to do your homework and read the trades. Or if there's a TV series that was made that's similar to your idea, look who produced it.
Just to add to that, the job I have in Italy right now, I read Deadline. There were 2 announcements, 2 properties that this production company were going to produce, and I called my agent and said, I want to write that. And 2 weeks later, I had the job. So it was because I knew that world, and I was willing to push my agents into chasing that.
Willing to relocate, which is
Yeah,
very big.
and I will, if the show goes, have to move to Europe for 6 to 9 months and then fly back afterward, and then be willing, if I care about the show, to fly back and work on later seasons. So it's a passion. Some of us get to live here while we work on these. I get pissed when people offer me those jobs.
And I also want to give a little more hope to those of you who don't have representation. Like Jacqui said, the markets and all that. My idea was set up at MIP TV. I've been a couple of times to MIPCOM and MIP TV with the Writers Guild, where I just want to let you all know that just going there and saying you're an American WGA writer has value in these other places. Now, you might recognize that it's expensive to fly to Cannes twice a year, but think about it this way. If you're saving up for a vacation to go to France, why not go in April or October, put in a few $100 and go to MIP and meet all the producers from all around the world. Don't show up empty-handed, do your preparation. You can set up meetings for, you have the whole program for a month or 2 before. You can start setting up meetings with anyone that would be appropriate for the project you have. Show up with some visual materials, and as Chris said, the idea you have, whether it's IP or not, if it's something personal that only you can talk about, something that they have to go through you for, but that also feels international, that is going to be important even if you do the entrepreneurial way. So it is possible without an agent. It's just a lot harder and more expensive, but if you think of it like vacation, it's fine.
Okay, we have a question over here.
All right, this is going to be the last question. Is it Brian?
We mostly talked today about South America and Europe. What about moving even further afield, say Russia, India, obviously China, South Korea, those markets? If anyone has the experience with that, if there's any differences, or if it's all the same approach as you move outside of Europe and South America?
Russia, obviously working in Russia is a complicated thing to do.
Putin's a good guy.
Thank you, Mr. Trump.
Financier series, he's a good guy.
One thing you'll find as you look into sort of the international markets is there's a wide variety of quality of the different countries' television industries. And, as I said, England's always been good, Scandinavia's good. The rest of Europe is proving itself right now. Russia has some real talent in TV. I've seen a TV show that they did. This is not about setting up something over there, but just in terms of the general environment. Look at go online and try to find the trailer for a show called Thaw, T-H-A-W. It's like the Russian version of Mad Men. It's one of the most beautiful trailers I've ever seen. And I watched a TV show that they made for no money, which everything was first person point of view, which sounds like it'll make you throw up, but it was really, really interesting. A whole episode, 30 minutes from the actors I saw a making of, they were wearing basically like catcher's masks with the camera on it.
Sounds like a YouTube video, basically.
Yeah, I think there is like a YouTube video by the same guy who did this. But in any case, there's a wide variety. Turkey weirdly has some good TV. Russia has some good TV. has good TV.
India, I mean, they have a huge market.
They have a huge market, but I've never seen any show from Asia even. I've never seen any show from Asia, so I have no idea. But theoretically, their markets aren't that developed, or else we would have heard about it. I mean, everyone's done. I mean, Israel obviously has great TV. Homeland started off as an Israeli show, but it really just depends country by country, and you just have to look into it. But for some reason, Asia, all of Asia, seems to be still developing their TV. No, do you know it? Korea. Yeah, that's actually right. I forgot about that. Korea's great.
And there's a lot of Americans sloshing around China right now. But the key thing is, and there are a lot of American producers who've teamed up with their Chinese TV companies, but the key thing is it has to have a cultural component. So it has to have at least some Chinese elements to it. That would be the key.
And that's true of most countries, but China's rules are just very strict, and they clash in a lot of times with American values.
There can be no violence, harder. Like no guns, no. So there goes half of our drugs.
But that goes back to what I was saying. If you don't want to become a master of that culture and understand it as well as an outsider can, it's not worth the time. Why go to, if you don't love China, you don't want to sell something in China. Yeah.
All right. Thank you, everyone.